Next, we'll have a look at the randomization panel at the top of the plugin. This is where all the really creative controls within PLAYBEAT live. First off, right in the middle is the big random button. This will randomize all the parameters for all of the channels and steps within PLAYBEAT. Clicking this button once will randomize the steps, density, pitch, flam, volume, and pan of each step within the sequence. The amount of how much it randomizes each one of these sections is defined by the settings within these sections. So if you click through to the steps, the density, the pitch, the flam, the volume, and the pan, you'll find the settings underneath here, and these are the settings that are being used for the randomization. Any one of these sections can be locked, so it is not affected by the main randomization. For example, if we like these steps, we can lock them using the lock button here, and then when we press the random button, it will not randomize the steps. As well as locking any of the separate sections, you can also lock the channels as well. For example, maybe we don't want to change the steps on this first channel. I can lock this channel, and then when I hit the random button, it will randomize all the steps of the other channels except that one. You'll notice two other buttons that surround the big random button. The one on the left is the remix button. This will create a subtly different version of the current pattern. This can be useful for trying out different variations. The button on the right is the Latch button. This works very similar to the big random button, but it only works when you've got it held down. It will randomize the pattern, and as soon as you let go of it, it will go back to the previous pattern. This can be great for performance and creating fills within your pattern. Now let's have a look at the individual parameters that you can control. These are on the middle here. And next to each one of these sections is its own random button. This works very much like the big random button, but only for that section. For example, we can randomize the steps just by hitting the random button next to steps. Let's start off by looking at the steps, and underneath here we can see the different controls that we can use for the randomization. There's two different modes within here for the randomization. We can do it as fixed, or we can do it as a range. Let's start off with fixed. So the amount here, we can see we have 3. This will be 3 fixed steps that we can do within here. I'm going to activate it so it goes into fixed mode. And this will then generate 3 steps for each channel here every time that we click random. We can decrease this amount. So maybe we just want 1 step and we can click random again. And you can see there's 1 step for every channel. On the other hand, we can use a range. If I select range on here, I can choose a minimum and a maximum value, and it will randomize between this. For example, maybe we want between 2 steps and 4 steps. And when I click random, every single channel will get a minimum of 2 steps and a maximum of 4 steps. So you can see in the first channel here, we have 3 steps that have been filled in. This second channel here, we have 4 steps and 2 steps for this third channel, for example. Now, when you're generating these steps, you might find that you might have 1 or 2 of these steps that you really like, and maybe not so much the others. What you can do is use the lock facility here. I can click to activate it, and then click on the notes that I want to keep. So I can lock these 2 steps here, but these 2 will then get regenerated next time I hit the random button. If you want to unlock any of these, you can simply just click on it again, making sure that the lock is still activated here. And when you're finished locking and unlocking, you can simply turn that off. If you want to reset the lock for all steps, you can click the reset button here. And if you want to reset all steps within the sequencer, you can click the reset button. Next up, we have density. You can think of this as splitting a step into equal sub-steps to create a rapid repeated note. You'll see the sequencer changes below to show the density for each step. You can increase or decrease this for each individual step from a minimum of 1, which is a standard note, up to a maximum of 8 subdivisions. So now let's have a look at the different settings that are used for the randomization under density. The first parameter here is how many of the steps within each individual channel is given that density value. At the moment, it's set to 1. So if I click random, one single step within each channel will get the density that is generated from these parameters here. And then just like the steps, we have the ability to have a fixed density or a range of density. So let's try this fixed density to start with. Or we can choose a range. And just like steps, we can lock any of these notes so they aren't affected when we randomize. And again, you can reset this, or you can reset all of the density from this button here. Next up, let's have a look at pitch. And as you can see, this looks very similar to steps and density. Once again, we have the option of having fixed notes or a range of notes when it comes to randomization. And just to show you a different way of doing it, I'm actually going to select channel 4. I'm going to randomize the pitch for that. So you can see here that I've got the range selected and the minimum note is going to be F2 and the maximum note is going to be G3. So it's going to pick a note from that range. And again, we can lock any of those steps within there and we can reset all of the pitch information from this button here. Next up, we have Flam, and this is very similar to density in the way that it works. However, it's just one simple repetition. And the number here is the milliseconds in delay between the original note and then the Flam note. The first parameter within here allows us to select how many other steps are being affected by the Flam. And let's try randomizing this. So by pressing random there, I've actually got it set to range and the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 120 milliseconds. Let's try on the fixed amount. Again, we can lock any of these notes, reset it, and we can reset all of the Flam for all of the notes affected. Next, let's move on to volume. And this is the volume for each individual step. Again, we have two different modes within here. We have a fixed volume or a range of volume. Let's try randomizing it. So at the moment that is set to a range. So the minimum is going to be 90. The maximum is going to be 127. But of course we can change this. We can bring this down, for example, and it will now be between 46 and 77. You can create some really interesting results with this by using 16th notes. For example, let's reset all the volume control. I'm going to go back into the steps. I'm going to light up all of these steps for this closed hat. And then I'm going to go back to the volume tab here. I'm going to select channel 4 and just do randomization on that. As you can see there, every single 16th note has a slightly different volume level and just makes it a little bit more natural. And while we got those 16th notes highlighted, let's move on to the pan section. And this is very similar to the volume, but instead you're panning it from left to right. And we have, again, the fixed or the range way of randomization. So we can have a minimum here, for example, of, let's choose maybe 25% left, and then a maximum of, say, 25% right. And I'll randomize those hats again. So you can hear those hats slightly panning from left to right randomly using this pan control. Again, with all those sections, you can lock individual notes within here. If you don't want to change them whilst randomizing, you can reset those lock notes. And of course, you can reset all of the panning by hitting the reset button here.